Episode number 335, How to Uncover Your Church's Voice with Barbara Carnero. Let's do it.
This is the definitive podcast for helping you plan, create, and execute dynamic worship experiences at your church. Useful, practical content in the areas of production, worship, communications, first impressions, and more. This is Making Sunday Happen.
Hey guys, this week's episode of the podcast is brought to you by Media Shout. I recommend 3 presentation software: ProPresenter, Media Shout, and Easy Worship. And the team at Media Shout is really excellent. With them, you're going to get some amazing customer service and care. And if you're on the hunt for presentation software, take a look at Media Shout 7 and all the new features there. I'm going to be having Dave Fry from the Media Shout team on the podcast in just a few weeks. And we'll dive into a lot of the new features and how the software can be used at your church. So check out Media Shout 7. Well, on today's podcast, I welcome my friend Barbara Carnero. Barbara has a background working in the agency world, and she gave it all up to come and work for ministry in the local church. It's really an amazing story. You're going to hear a lot of her story today, and then how you can find your church's voice. She has a lot of experience in the communications realm and marketing and agency work, and she brings that to the local church. And we're going to talk about all of that today. In today's episode. So my chat with Barbara Carnero is on its way.
We've listened to church staff and volunteers just like you, and we've responded with our most comprehensive and customizable version yet. It's stable, it's powerful, and it's easy to use. You'll find intuitive tools like Sermon Builder, customizable plugins, and a refined slide editor, all backed by our amazing customer support made of pastors, techs, and volunteers available when you need them. It's everything you need to create powerful presentations while saving you time. Introducing Media Shout 7.
Hey guys, today I welcome Barbara Carnero. She is a communication strategist and the owner of Word Revolution. She's the brain behind 412 Lab, a training program for church communications. She's a speaker, mentor, designer, all-around guru. Barbara, welcome. Thanks so much for hanging out.
Thank you for having me, Carl.
Well, I only butchered your name once, so I have a bad habit of just destroying names, so I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Well, I'm so glad we got to hang out today. We've kind of interacted in a few of the communications circles, and we went to, was it Michael Lukaszewski's house and did a barbecue and hung out there. So I really enjoyed getting to know you there and everything. So how have you been? We haven't hung out in person in a while.
I know it's been a while. So we moved down to South Carolina. That's kind of what happened post-COVID, in a way to get closer to family. I think overall the pandemic kind of, just revealed several things about people and life in general. So we decided it was time to move closer to family. And kids had to come first during that time. So I was in a way focusing on that for a period of time and now kind of back into the rhythms of engaging and helping churches again. So, yeah.
Yeah. How's everything affected you and the churches that you serve and the ministries that you serve? What's been your kind of pulse over the last year or so?
That's a great question. I can look back and say several of the churches we work with were actually very receptive to feedback because there are no gurus for that, right? Nobody has experience. Nobody went through it. But there's certain things that you can somewhat be prepared for, or at least say, hey, this is what I know exists, or this is what I know is available. And I saw several leaders willing to say, hey, maybe there is a different way to do things. And we don't have all the answers now. And there's an opportunity to basically try something new. And so I saw several leaders actually taking the opportunity to invest in being more in their community, being more present. And that was, in my opinion, very positive. I also saw some resistance. When you look at moving church to online, that was a big struggle for many leaders. And so I can tell you what I was able to notice, Carl, is that there was like a very diverse numbers of responses, but overall we can kind of put them in two separate camps. So I saw leaders embracing change like never before, and that was for me a very positive thing. And I saw leaders trying to double down on what we've been doing for so long has to stay. And I think it was just more polarizing in a way. So
yeah, I saw the same thing. Probably a little bit more receptive than resistant, because it was kind of a realization with churches that weren't online, especially, of like, oh no, you're right, I don't know how to do this help, please. And so, receptive. And also too, I'm encouraged going forward, because if they didn't have a presence online, now they do, and they're not going to go back, which I'm encouraged with. And I'm going to be, and I'd love your opinion on this. I kind of fall in the both and camp, where, if I don't want to forsake the gathering of believers, in fact, my church I go to was down for maybe 3 weeks of the whole thing, and then we were back up and in church. But so whatever your area is and whatever you're comfortable with, but I kind of feel like if people can gather, they should gather. But I also think that our online presence should be excellent as well, and not just an afterthought, security camera in the back of the room kind of thing. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I overall, I agree with you. I do think that online cannot be an overthought. And at the same time, it's an opportunity. It's a great opportunity. There's chances for us to engage with people that would never set foot in a church to begin with. So it's not just catering to those that can't come in person, or, are just trying to wait a little bit longer to go back to the congregation. We're now opening the doors to people that otherwise couldn't attend in the first place, or weren't willing to attend in the first place. And so that's where the opportunity for me lies, more than serving the one that, may come in person, but may not this week. Now, on the other side of things, the gathering of believers, I think the pandemic has redefined how the gathering happens. And I found that more and more, and this is actually one example I saw in one of the churches that I work with. They were very much encouraging people to gather in their homes to watch online together. So during the times when they absolutely could not meet in person, they were creating resources and opportunities and very intentional in their communication to encourage people to gather within their bubble in their homes. So it's not, family such and such in their house and family such and such in their house. It was those two families together. So there was many expressions of church that otherwise we would never have, and I think somewhat we're moving away from the mega church approach to congregation and gatherings. I think there's more and more evidence that smaller gatherings are going to be happening, or are already happening in a way or another. So,
I agree. They definitely are. And I think that there are multiple, avenues for church. I don't want to completely discount, church online and 100% church online if people need to have that. I think if they can get to church, let's, come on to church. I think we need to create the spaces in both environments where no matter where or if they're on vacation, or no matter when and where they are, that they can get an experience with church that's great in both locations. That makes sense?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I want to know a little bit about your story. Now, you're a fairly new Christian, right? You've only been a believer, 9 or 10 years, maybe a little bit more. Yeah. So tell me about that. And I think people would be interested in kind of how you came to faith, and then your story of transitioning your agency.
Yeah. So, you hear stories of people coming to faith from a deep time of pain or trauma, or I don't know, just like a hard time in their lives. And I feel like for me, it was the opposite. I look back at my life and I remember thinking, wow, why am I able to work and make money when my friend doesn't have a job? Why am I able to get pregnant at the first try when my other friend is trying for 5 years?
Right.
Why am I just kept wondering, who's rewarding me? Now, why am I so lucky, right? In the midst of what's going on around me. And there are so many stories of devastation and sickness and miscarriages. I remember thinking, why is my life so good? And again, I couldn't point back and say, oh, because I'm doing all the right things. That was not true. There's nothing that my friend was doing that would prevent her from getting pregnant just as much as I was able to get pregnant. So, just looking at life in general. So I was already kind of wondering these questions in my heart. I've always knew there was a God, but my God was, from a Catholic tradition, was pretty much put in a box, and you kind of pull him out of the box. I like to say it, like, for me, it was only when I was in an airplane and there was turbulation. So that's when my God would come out of that box, because I needed somebody to pray to.
We're going down.
So, I know that's the time when you start reciting the things that you've learned as a kid. And, so I never doubted there was someone or something beyond me, but it didn't have a real face. It was very abstract. And so coming down the streets of Annapolis, we had just moved to Annapolis a month prior. And this random person gives me a bottle of water on the 4th of July. It was a free bottle of water, had a name tag to it, like a business card attached to it, and black business card. And I thought, oh, the nightclubs in this town are cool. It was like, they give you free water on the 4th of July. I thought it was a nightclub, not even kidding you. And I got home and I checked their website. I was like, wait a minute, this is not a restaurant or a nightclub. Or a bar. This is a church. And I remember thinking, what kind of church does that? Who are these people? And Carl, I think I read even their copyright notice at the bottom of the website. Like, I read every single word, every single page. I was just so intrigued. It was like a great level of curiosity about why people would do that. And so again, it was coming from this place of grace, of great amount of grace that I couldn't really understand. One thing that this website had was the ability to sit with a pastor. So they had coffee on us. I think that's how they used to call it. Coffee on us. You'd sit with a pastor and ask questions. Well, I get there, and this guy is really young. He's younger than I am. He's with his wife and his child. And I'm thinking, dude, you're like, what, 20? What are you doing? You're supposed to be pursuing a career and money and possessions and the car and the dog and the fence and what are you doing in a church at this age? It was so, again, like you got to understand, like, I did not grow up in the church. So for me, this is a new concept. And they sat with me and my husband, and at some point in time, they just basically gave a face that I was missing. And they told me about Jesus. They told me it's not a God in a box that is abstract, is a real person, and you can have a relationship with him, and he's eager to have a relationship with you. And I was sold. For me, it was a no-brainer. It was, I used to say, it was very Paul-like. My conversion was like, I'm in. There's no way anybody else can convince me that this is not real, So That's how I came to faith. And the funny part of it all is that this was a church plant, and they did not even have services yet. They were just now building their team. There was maybe 12 people at church, and they had no services. So I was saved by a church that wasn't even operating yet in a traditional sense of the word. So, yeah.
And you had an agency before you were a believer. And then I want to hear the story of how you emailed them, had to email them all and basically say,
Yeah, that's a fun story. And, I've had an agency since 2001. So it's been several years and on and off, at first as a freelancer, and then, kind of things took off. So things are going well. I have a solid, portfolio of clients. I have a team. We're gaining great momentum. Things are growing. And then I become a believer. And there's this great desire in my heart to help the church. And I'm like, I know this particular church here doesn't have anybody doing their website or their communications or, so I wanted to help. I wanted to help with the things that I knew how to do. So for me, it was one of those moments of thinking, without even knowing, I want my talents to be for this. I couldn't really put those words to express it. For me, a lot of it was new. And you got to remember, like at this point, I had never read the Bible. I had never gone to a small group. I didn't even know some of the things, some of the wording that, people will talk about, hey, do you go to a small group? And I was like, what is that? Like, I didn't even know what a small group means, So all I knew is I had this great desire to use my talents to help whatever they were doing.
Yeah.
So I remember asking the pastor, hey, do you guys ever need help with anything, graphic design, whatever? And soon enough, I was helping with that. And, you see these two parallel lives. You have the agency where you have clients paying you and you're doing all this work and you have a team. And then on the side, you have this almost like a passion project like that was very exciting for me. And at some point, I just felt like, you know what? This is what I want to do. Like, I want to help other churches like this one with the things that I know how to do, with the talents that I have. And so I'm ready to take that leap of faith and say, okay, let's rename, let's rebrand. That's when we became Word Revolution. So this thought of having to email all of my clients, I don't know. There's a part of me that's thinking, okay, let's just give them a reason, make it very professional, and just say, hey, we're rebranding, and kind of leave it very, abstract, or just be completely upfront and tell them why. And I can shake it off. I felt like I had to email them the real reason why I was rebranding, why the name. I was now Word Revolution as the name of the agency, and then who we wanted to work with. So here I am writing this note, and it's not it's not 2 paragraphs. It's a letter. And I'm talking about coming to faith and how I now believe in Jesus, and how I want to work with churches, and I want to use my talents and my skills to help churches with what I do. I write the whole email, and I'm sitting there looking at the computer, and I'm thinking, okay, this is it. God is going to take this away. I'm not supposed to have an agency. Now that I'm a Christian, I'm supposed to go to Africa and feed the kids. Like that's what everybody does. Like I'm supposed to go feed the hungry, right? Such an incomplete view of God. But anyway, I'm thinking this is it. Like God just wants me to do it because I'm not supposed to have this agency anymore. This is his way of killing it. I wrote the letter, and I couldn't even stay on my computer. I'm like, okay, I'm going to hit send. And I send it to these 300 and something clients. And I just left. I couldn't even open my email for a while. I was just so fearful. And what happened next, however, was the complete opposite. And now I had clients that were introducing me to their pastors. I had clients that were on boards of Christian ministries that now were saying, hey, you totally need to come and present to our board of directors. And I'm not even kidding you, Carl, like overnight, I had a whole bunch of new clients within this new niche that I was wanting to operate in.
So what was the biggest takeaway from that? Obviously, the Lord really laid it on your heart to do something different, and you took a big risk. What was the major things that, in looking back, that the Lord taught you through that?
Yeah. So more than anything, is that I will be taken care of. That's kind of the big thing. And, even if those other clients were to say, hey, we don't want to work with you anymore, there's peace in knowing that God would take care of me anyways. So the way that he, the way that this whole thing went through for me was a confirmation of sometimes some things may not make sense. Sometimes some things may look kind of scary. But that does not mean God is taking you down a road of destruction. Like he's not taking you down a path of, hey, I'm going to take this away from you and I'm going to make it very painful. I don't think God uses those tactics anymore, but I used to think that way. That's the impression that I had, growing up with a strange God, with a, far away God is. Like, he's out to punish us, and he's out to, lead us to destruction. And that was the opposite. He was showing his love towards me in a way that I wasn't even expecting. Yeah.
So tell me what Word Revolution is, and 412 Lab too. What do you guys do? You help churches mainly with branding and kind of communication strategies, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Word Revolution was at first, again, kind of transitioning from the agency. We're mostly a website factory. We're just one after the other. It was one website after the other. We were basically a web design firm. And once I started shifting towards working with churches, what I realized is that the work was incomplete. There was a lot of just mechanics, right? So it's like, hey, give me your content. Here's your website. Give me your content. Here's your website. But organizations out there in the world don't have the greatest dilemma that I think churches have, which is you got to speak to, believers and non-believers at the same time. You have two diverse groups that are in complete opposite spectrums, sides of the spectrum, and you want to be able to speak to both of them. Because I know what it is to be a first-time visitor. I know what it is to go to a website with no Christianese in my vocabulary and wonder what these things mean, right? So I know what it is to be the person that is reading these things and has absolutely no clue whatsoever.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing how God, in your past experience, put you in a place like that and then brought you to faith, and then now you're able to help people with their language to outsiders and things like that. What an incredible way to use your past.
Yeah. And I think that's true. That is very true. So for me, it was I was, sometimes you have to be the one putting the content that they are sending you in. And I'm like, guys, a person that has never been to church is not going to, they really are going to be so confused.
Yeah.
And the problem sometimes is not confusion. If you confuse people, you lose them. But besides confusion, there are things that are either offensive or hard to understand, or so you're like, you want them to be able to engage with you at one level or another. And so we need to figure out a way to speak to the people inside of the house, maybe through a different channel, not the website, or maybe it's through different pages. They're inside and not necessarily the front page. And that is what led me down this path of trying to understand how can you make these websites in a way that is very different than, other companies and organizations have to deal with, because I don't think there's a niche out there that is as complex as the church. And maybe the one that comes the closest is gyms. I often say this, that gyms have a lot of similarities with church. They have their annual, everybody goes to the gym in January, right? You have to speak to the person that goes all year long, and then you have to speak to the person that is just trying to gain the courage to show up once. Right. There's a lot of invitation. You go when a friend invites you and promises you'll be there with you. I think gyms is probably the only closest thing I've seen to the dynamics of communicating as a church or as a gym. But besides that, the rest of the world, they don't have this dilemma.
Yeah.
So that's what led me to then, little by little, Word Revolution moved from just being, hey, we do websites, to let me help you with your messaging. Let me try to understand who's around you. Let me help you perceive with you who you can serve well right now. Let me look at your demographics. Let me help you with the strategy to communicate in a way that is not confusing to either one of your groups.
Yeah.
And that path has been just amazing. So 412 Lab is the course that kind of, what I realize is that the agency work is done for you, right? We come in, we do the work, and then kind of have to take it from there. But there's a lot of churches out there that don't need us to go in and do it for them. They just need to understand those dynamics, understand the strategy and how to create them. And so what I was able to do over time was say, okay, what I'm already doing for some clients, let me teach churches on how to do that exact same thing.
Yeah.
And so we've been able to bring 3 cohorts through it. And it's amazing to hear their stories. But, more than anything, instead of saying, hey, here's your strategy, run with it, I want to teach them on how to build their strategy. So independent of their size, they will always be able to pivot. They will always be able to create a strategy that grows with them. Because that's the other piece, Carl. You can make a website for a church today or give them a communication strategy. But if they grow in size or if they decline, sometimes, that happens as well, that strategy no longer fits them.
Right.
And so they're stuck with something that is not working anymore.
Yeah, good. Well, I want to dive into that to the basically uncovering your church's voice and who you are as a church. So I've read some of your articles and notes on this, and I love where it's going. I want to get your thoughts on it. So give me an overview here. I know that you've heard pastors say something like, we need to discover our voice as a church. What do they mean when they say that, and what should they mean when they say that?
Yeah. That's a good question. And I even wonder if two pastors mean the same thing when they say it. What I believe is true is churches have this great desire to reach more people, right? So the motivation is to reach. What I mean when I say to clients and to churches, you need to find your voice, is simply saying, hey, you already have a personality as a church. You already have a DNA, and that DNA and that personality will not be the same as a church next door. Yours is supposed to be unique. That's why God put you right where you are. But you're not supposed to be everything for everybody, because otherwise God wouldn't put the door next to you. According to his plan, you would be enough for the whole community. So given those little details, I want them to think of it this way. How you preach, how you decorate your building, if you have a building or not, how you treat guests, how much you interact with them or not. All of this is a part of your DNA. You have the opportunity to know what it is and be intentional about it, or you can just leave it to luck, right? Whatever happens, happens. I defend that churches have the ability to understand what their voice is and be actively, engaged in just perfecting it over time and making sure that everything they do is intentional. Some people may take this as manipulation. I don't think it's manipulation at all. I think it's simply saying, okay, how do I want to be perceived? Who's on the other side of me, and how can I make sure it's consistent? So the way you train your guests, a guest ministry, for example, will most likely come from this culture. I'll give you a very clear example. When I was first, visiting churches a few years after being a believer, I remember my husband saying, hey, I want to go in and out anonymously, because I want to check it out. I want to see what this thing is all about. I don't want to interact with anybody. I want to go in and out anonymously. So that means you're not going to go to a church of 100 people, because they will notice you. Right? They will know you're new. And I'm the opposite. I'm like, I want to go in and make sure they see me, make sure they say hi, and they engage with me, and they tell me what next steps are available. So Here you have one couple, two people. We're the same age, the same generation, but we're pursuing different things because our personalities are different. That church, whatever we visit, cannot be everything for just the two of us. Imagine a whole community. So you're always going to have little details about even how you decorate your building, how your tables are set up, your chairs are set up, the songs you sing, like all of that is already a part of your voice.
Right.
My point is simply to say, understand what that voice is, outline it, and be intentional. So everybody from your teams is basically rowing in the same direction.
So let's get into that. So you are very clear on kind of how a team should discover their voice together. Mm-hmm. So it really starts with, it really comes down to being intentional about it, right? So you're first going to kind of sit down with your stakeholders and so let me ask you that. How do I determine who my stakeholders are and who is in that room and who's not?
Yeah. I wish I could give you a foolproof answer to that, but I think every church is so unique. But I can share with you some patterns that I've seen over time. So if, let's say, I don't know, a church of 500 people, you may have 3 pastors. They're full-time, a worship leader, and an admin person. There's a high chance these 5 people can be in the room when you're going through these discovery meetings, because there's a lot of these 5 people are very integrated. They're doing most of it together because of the size of the church, because they're all pretty much aware of all of the dynamics that are happening. I've seen cases where people have said, okay, let's just bring in the main leadership. So the first, the 3 pastors, but not the other 2. And I've seen cases where people would bring all 5 team members because they're very united. And then I've seen the opposite. I've seen the cases where we're going to bring 20 people to this meeting because Miss Betty has been here for 20 years and she needs to have a word. But I'm like, you can't, this is not about who has been there the longest. It's more about like, if you were to, I don't know, decide on a building, who would be there for those meetings? And this is kind of one of the questions that I normally ask. If you had to rename your church, who would be there? If you had to decide on a building, who would be there? So big decisions that you feel like, are the future of your church. So what I have noticed over the years is that sometimes important people are left outside. So your lead pastor has to be there. And the way that I normally explain this to the teams is this, like, you're going to go through a journey together through these questions, and you want your lead pastor to go through that journey with you, because that's going to bring clarity and union in terms of this unity of vision is going to happen at the same time for all of you. So these are brainstorming sessions. They help you see where people are. So it's very unifying. It helps you understand, I never thought that's how you perceived our church, and then you see the other person next to you think differently. So it basically creates a leveled approach to how you perceive the church, because your voice can't go in one direction when you have 5 people seeing it differently.
Yeah. So one thing I like that you have here is to, in these brainstorming meetings, have each other describe your church to someone who might not know anything about your church.
Yeah.
Right. So kind of your situation in that, like, for someone who doesn't even know what the term small groups mean,
right?
Like, explain our church to them. I thought that was interesting. Sorry to interrupt you. You go ahead.
No, that's it. And so these questions are questions that will help you understand where other people in your team are, and they will help you create a unified view of, again, this personality that your church has. Because you have to remember, brands are perceived as having a personality. It's almost as if they're a person, and the same is true for churches. So you always look at a church and there's a perception that you cannot control. But if you're intentional, you can somewhat pursue this identity in a way that everybody's going in the same direction.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So give me some more things, and I wrote down a few, but give me some more things that this stakeholder group can think about internally and brainstorm about.
We normally have them go through 3 meetings. So let me give you just a very, very basic summary of. The first one is all about their church. It's their DNA. I'll ask them questions like, what gets you out of bed every day? What's your greatest pet peeve about churches? What do you see others doing that you think is just, not right or not good for the community? So questions that normally address the emotions that you have, because those emotions normally drive the way that you do things at your church. What core values do you think are behind what you do? If you had a bumper sticker, what would it say? So questions that have to do with their DNA, really, they all have to do with the church as a person almost. The second one is about the people on the other side. So who's around you? What kind of groups are you already interacting with? Some cities, there's a greater chance you're dealing with young professionals. There are other cities where you're dealing with the older generation. Other cities, there's a lot of, families with younger kids. And so there are several groups that you can most likely perceive around you. And that's what we do. We try to understand who's outside of your door. And then the third meeting, it's called the engagement gap. So I want to understand how much of a gap exists between me and them. In some areas, as you probably know, it's not complicated to get people to attend church. They're just picking which one, right? Mm-hmm. So you just need to be the church that provides whatever they like. Either the kids' ministry is better or the worship is different. And so it's more, in a way, very, the competition is different. In other areas, the gap is significantly greater. You first have to get them to even consider that church as an option. And so this engagement gap, who you're trying to reach and how you reach them, is something that we need to assess. And spending some time understanding how much of a gap exists will give you a greater insight on how to communicate with them.
Does it help to do some type of survey from the community or have people in that do not attend your church, ask them questions about your church so that you can get an outsider point of view? Absolutely.
I'd say anytime you can do that, I would say go ahead and do it. Do it annually within your people if you can. These can be and should be anonymous. So send them out. Have people fill it out. If you have some insights from the actual community, that's even better. So these surveys can give you far more information than just random demographics from your city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Good. Why is it important for a church to set aside budget for branding, for marketing, for those types of things?
The greatest answer to that, Carl, has to do with, again, the intentionality, right? So you're already communicating. You're already a brand. Do you want to be somewhat in control of what people are perceiving or not? So if you don't want to be in control, if you don't want to be intentional about it, then you don't have to assign any budget to it or time or people. You just let it be and it will take its course. But we've seen so many churches decline because of that, where they become irrelevant, where they become invisible. And so branding is nothing more than to simply continue to present yourself in a certain direction. That way, the perception that people have about you is always consistent. So in my opinion, the budget, not just in money, but also in time and other resources like people, are just ways for you to continue to say, this is what we stand for. This is who we want to engage with. This is how we can serve these groups of people. And we're going to train our people to do the same thing, right? So branding goes beyond just your logo. It's how, you're messaging all of the channels that you have. It's how people perceive you when they come to you. It's how they perceive you before they come to you. And it takes intentionality.
Yeah. So, yeah. Why is the church always trying to build trust? Is that true, that a church is always trying to build trust in the congregation?
I think so. I think that's true for most brands, if not all. There's always you engage with those that you trust. And so even though, we're not engaging with a business per se, you want to know that the church you're attending or trying to attend or thinking of attending. I think trust is a huge asset. It's a currency that we currently have. In this day and age, it's not going to go anywhere. So the amount of information we receive every day, our brains are constantly filtering out, can I trust you? Can I trust you? Without us even knowing, right? So we're all wondering if this is someone that I can trust. So the church is not immune to that.
What about what is a strong church brand trying to accomplish? What if I have a brand? What is it going to accomplish? A good brand. What is it going to accomplish for me?
A good brand. So you may be surprised about this, but I think it's actually significantly simpler than we care to admit sometimes. One activity that I recommend to my clients to do often is you got to list all of your assets. You have to know where your brand is being expressed. And let me give you some very practical examples. Some people have created their bio for Facebook 10 years ago. They've never looked at it since. Okay. That's an expression of their brand that has been sitting there for 10 years. They've never went back to update it. You have an about us or a bio in your Google business page. Same thing. You have photos in your Google business page that probably were, again, 10 years ago, right? These are all assets. These are all points of contact. These are all potentials for perception. So for the person coming from the outside, they're all perceiving you from these different angles. And somewhat they became invisible to us. And the best example I can give you is like, when you come to your house and there are areas where you don't see dust anymore, but the minute someone new comes in, then they become like, oh yeah, they're so dusty. And that's exactly that. We have areas of our brand that became so invisible to us that we don't even think about them anymore. Right. So the best thing to change this is to list them out. So create a document where you have, we have a bio on your YouTube page. We have a bio on our Facebook page. We have a bio on our Instagram page. We have a link on our Instagram page. We have a sign outside that has our old phone number. We have, you list everything. We have these QR code stickers that go in the back of the seat in front of the person, like where you're sitting in the congregation. These are all brand little voices, little expressions. But if I don't see it all together, it's hard for me to remember to update them. It's hard for me to remember to even be aware of what's there. So my first recommendation to people is you got to list everything down. What happens if I dial your number? Do you have a message, like a voicemail? Most likely you have not dialed that number in a long time. So maybe your voicemail can change regularly. Maybe your voicemail is outdated. Maybe your signature in your email is completely outdated. Maybe your signature in your email can be another channel for you to communicate your brand. So if you know where you are, then you can go back and you can easily keep an eye out on opportunities to, just present yourself within the same consistency that I was telling you about.
Those are really good. Yeah. How does the church answer the question, who are we equipped to serve?
They will all say everybody. By nature, pastors just love to serve everybody. And I think that, again, it's a real pure desire of the heart. But here's what I normally have them do. Okay. So list the groups. Okay. Oh, we have, families with young kids, the soccer moms kind of group. Okay. Then we have the young adults. Then we have the 50s that are in that sandwich age where they have the teenagers, young adults, but they also have their parents very sick. And okay. So let's list them out. Here's all the groups that you can serve. Now let's put them in order. Who can you serve well today? Like if you had 50% more, and, would your church collapse? You can't say, we've had cases. This happened at a previous church where they had to turn kids down because they had no capacity. So you can't serve more children in this town right now. I mean, imagine a family coming for the first time and they're not going to get there early. They don't know they have to fill out an application to get their kid in the service. And most of the time, they don't get there in time there at all. And they get there and they say, you can't go in anymore. We're at capacity. Well, what would that person do next Sunday?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm coming back.
Right? And we all know, like, we have an enemy that is constantly, chatterboxing a bunch of stuff in our ears. Imagine those that are not in church yet. So you got to believe, you got to be prepared for this influx. So when I look at the groups of people, I'll tell them, I say, hey, if you're capacity with kids, I'm not saying don't be intentional with families, but you could focus on a different group right now. So whoever comes your way, you receive them. We're not closing doors to those that come to us. But in your outreach, when you're growing beyond what you currently have in your church, where do you go? engage with young adults, engage with young professionals. You can create opportunities where you can grow that group now in order to serve them well before you can, before you have a bigger building for the kids or more services, something like that. Yeah.
Well, as we close today, maybe kind of put a bow on our conversation of updating our church brand or finding our voice. What are some good takeaways for a church to start implementing next week?
Yeah. I would say the very two things that I can give you right away. One is start writing down what you're hearing. I call this audience language, nothing extraordinary about the name. Just create a document, a living document, Google Doc, where you start writing down the things that you're hearing from your congregation. People will say these things in baptism videos. They will say these things in small groups. They will say these things in the hallways. They will say these things to the leaders in emails, maybe. You can even, again, if you do the surveys, you can collect that language from the surveys. I would encourage, if you have a newsletter that you send out every night, and ask people for, ask them a specific question. What are you struggling with right now? Send us, hit reply and let us know. And so all of these things that you're collecting from your audience, from the people that are already coming to your church or not, put that in a document. It doesn't need any names. I don't need to know it's from Mary or from John. I just need to know what they said. So now you have a collection of what's going on outside of you that you may be unaware of. And any leader can contribute to that document because it's anonymous. You don't have to put names to it. So that's one thing. The second thing is the list that I was telling you about. List every potential point of contact for your brand. You would be surprised by how many you've forgotten about. You will be completely surprised. And I was going through that with a client the other day. And it was like, oh, yeah, we have a Vimeo account and we haven't updated anything since 2017, and there's a bio there in our old logo. But all of these are showing up in Google results. So make sure you have an account of every single potential brand channel that you have out there. In some cases it's photography, in some cases it's bios, in some cases it's links, in some cases it's videos on Vimeo, for example, or YouTube. All of these account for your brand. Just having them listed out will give you a great opportunity to create campaigns in the future that are far more effective. So if you're doing Christmas, you can look at your list and say, okay, we can update this on 10 different places.
Right.
All at once.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. I like that. Kind of keeps us in the front. And I'll say this on church websites a lot, that we kind of put it up there and it's kind of the dirty closet that we never look at. And I think that that's true about a lot of our assets, the Vimeos and the YouTubes and we don't use Twitter anymore. Well, your old church logo's up there and your bios. And you haven't posted a new sermon on your website since 2016. Right. But you put watch messages on your homepage. That's a problem. So I think to pull that in the forefront is very valuable. But you're doing a great work and really, really appreciate it. If people want to get in touch with you and learn more about what you do and connect with you, how can we do that?
Yeah, Facebook is a good tool. You'll find me there. And my email is barbara@wordrevolution.com. So you can just reach out directly.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And thanks for chatting with me today.
Same here.
Pretty much every time people of the Christian faith gather together, there's music involved. There's a lot of work and effort that goes into music, singing, songs. We have sound systems, ways of projecting lyrics, lights, microphones, instruments, rehearsals, sound checks. This music is, as an expression of worship, is really important to people of the Christian faith. But do we know the good and important reasons why we have music? Yes, we want God to be worshipped, but is there clarity on why we think it's important that we use music to worship God? Sometimes I wonder what we're thinking. Maybe people think that we have songs so that the congregation knows to wander in from the car park, from the parking lot, or from the foyer? Or do we have songs so there's something in the church service that can happen before the pastor gets up to preach and the pastor wants to preach to a full room? Maybe we have singing and songs just to give ourselves something to do. We like music. Or do we have songs and singing simply because we always have? And so we better just keep doing it. Now, these might be reasons why some people are thinking of, maybe at least subconsciously, for why we have music, but there are much more important and good reasons why we value singing together as an expression of worship of God. And let's make sure our teams understand those good and important reasons. I'm Grant Norsworthy from More Than Music Mentor, providing online and on-site training for the heart and the art of worshiping musicians. Find out more at morethanmusicmentor.com.
The show notes for this episode are available now at makingsundayhappen.com.
Well, hey guys, thanks so much for checking us out this week. My thanks to AJ Schubert, Daniel Stavanis, and our great team at 1230 Media for producing and distributing this podcast. And you can get articles and also archive episodes and additional resources all at makingsundayhappen.com. You can go there for full show notes on each episode, and every episode that we've ever done on this podcast is archived there. You can even sort by category, so you can jump right to your field that you work in. So if you work in worship or communications or production, or multiple categories there, you can jump right to your field of interest, and the podcast will, the archive will sort right to your area of interest. That is all at makingsundayhappen.com, makingsundayhappen.com. Well, next week, I welcome Michael Boggs to the show. Michael was a member of the band FFH back in the day. He's a worship leader of the college experience Kairos in Nashville. He is a songwriter. He has a brand new single out called Have Mercy, Have Mercy. It's available now. And he is a very down-to-earth guy with a lot of experience in leading worship through song and more. So you're going to really learn a lot from him. Great guy, Michael Boggs, next week on the show. We'll go out there and create some incredible worship experiences this weekend. I'll catch you next week.
Making Sunday Happen is a production of the ministry of 1230 Media. For show notes, archive episodes, and more free resources for your church, visit makingsundayhappen.com.